So today, as Jim alluded to, we're going to talk about a little bit of the study that Robinson put together, but a lot about really a fair amount of what I've heard today already, which is how are people adapting to what's changing in our industry today? So before we get into formal introductions here, my goal is to keep you engaged here today. It's late in the afternoon, so I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience engagement. And I'll mix in a few stories as well. So we might as well get started with the audience engagement component. So for those of you in the room, if you would please raise your hand if you ship or receive LTL quantities. And those of you in the academic space, maybe you're aware of that. Couple. Okay, one. Japan, all right, good. And then also, you have to maintain the cold chain with those LTL quantities. Yeah? Hopefully I'm in the right room then. All right, great. But when I'm speaking with shippers and receivers in the produce and perishable arenas, I often hear that refrigerated LTL orders are a necessary evil within our industry. I get it. Everybody wants to ship truckload quantities of their products with flexible receiving requirements. But what I want to talk about today is turning that reefer LTL supply chain to your advantage. So as Jim mentioned, my name is Steve Gabrick, and I manage our Perishable Consolidation program at C.H.Robinson. We work with companies in the produce and perishable arenas to enable their sales initiatives and supply chains by driving innovation and creating a planned environment for their LTL orders. While my focus is mostly here on the domestic front, what I've heard today is a lot of what I'm going to talk about does correlate on the global market. So I'd ask you to keep an open mind as we go through that. And through our time today, I want you to walk away with an understanding that supply chains are changing with smaller orders delivered more frequently with greater visibility. Different people are buying different items through different channels, and they're being grown in different places, so they're coming to market through evolving cold chains. Again, a consistent theme that I think everybody talked about today so far is change. There's a lot of things that are changing, and Dr. Cook spoke about a lot of them. I'm going to talk about three primary changes that are impacting our industry and our industry supply chains today. Those three are consumer buying influences, product origin evolution, and how goods move. And from there, we're going to talk a couple of stories about how some shippers and receivers are adapting to these changes. And then we'll close with what you should be looking for in your transportation or consolidation providers. So with that, let's get into the first change, and that's consumer buying influences. What was once mostly just grocery, wholesale, and food service in our industry, well, now you have large retail, wholesale, drugstores, convenience stores. I think Dr. Cook said that the number is 156,000 convenience stores in the US, and granted, it's not a very vast supply offering in the convenience stores. Maybe we should go to Japan to get the right offering. But you also have e-commerce, and a lot of that, everything is changing to try to meet the consumer where they want to buy. I have drones up there as somewhat of a joke, but really you have Amazon that's pushing the envelope there and creating alternative means to get the product delivered faster and sooner. These many outlets for product sales are impacting the order size, frequency, and the number of destinations that each shipper is needing to service. Everyone, as I said earlier, everyone's attempting to engage the consumer where they want to buy. Mega cities here like New York City, the e-commerce or home delivery options are growing. Fresh Direct is here, no different than, or very similar to the UK's or London's company Ocado. And as I mentioned, Amazon continues to drive innovation here. But retailers are adapting to the increased desire for freshness and convenience, which is driven heavily from the millennial generation. The millennial generation's buying behavior is typically off of brand, health, and convenience. And the Boston Consulting Group found that young millennials are 3 times more likely to report strong brand recognition than their non-millennial counterparts. 3 times more likely. This group's buying influence is strong, and the world is listening. Here on the domestic front, you have big food and beverage companies that are fairly active in mergers and acquisitions. Just a few for an example is Hormel purchased Applegate Farms, which is a natural and organic meat and cheese company. General Mills purchased Annie's, which is a natural organic snack food company. Coca-Cola purchased a minority stake in Suja Juice, who's the market leader in the organic cold-pressed juice or the super premium juice market. In each of these examples, there's a common denominator is emerging categories. So with low interest rates today in the US, I think it's likely we'll continue to see these large food and beverage companies be active in M&A. The whole intent is to purchase and acquire for strong brand recognition, and some of these companies have come out and said, look, they're making the acquisition, but they're not going to change a thing. We're buying for the brand because that's what's being purchased at the stores. So I mentioned the ultra premium juice market, and that's what you see in the upper right-hand corner there. But that's quickly become a $2 billion industry in a matter of about 6 years. And for the most part, by and large, it's 4 to 6 pounds of produce in a bottle. It speaks to convenience, as a lot of times people will replace that with a meal, or replace a meal with that. You also have the fresh cut fruit and veg industry as a whole continues to expand, and there's been a bit of a resurgence on the traditional cut product items, capturing more and more shelf space in the grocery stores or any of the retail outlets. But with that, you also see traditional items with innovative packaging for convenience developing faster than ever. For example, sliced apples or baby carrots or single-serve packages of grapes. It's all about convenience, quick grab and go. And a lot of that comes back to a changing supply chain. Smaller orders delivered more frequently with greater visibility. I have Greek yogurt up there, again, with an emerging market. Chobani entered the marketplace roughly 7 years ago here in the US and just exploded from a shelf space perspective. Now, these items don't really appear to be losing steam on the space, or steam or space on the shelf anytime soon. They do highlight the concept of those smaller quantities delivered more frequently with greater visibility. So as I mentioned, I was going to tell a couple stories. So here's the first one. A couple weeks ago, I was traveling for work, and I stopped into a local microbrewery for dinner and a drink, and naturally, where else would you sit but at the bar? So I was sitting there, and the bartender opened the fridge where the bottled beer is stored, and there's a bottle of Evolution Fresh Juice, which is a super premium juice company that's owned by Starbucks. The bottle was half full. I'm assuming they weren't selling it at the brewery. So knowing I was going to talk about millennials and their buying influence and behaviors today, I figured I'd get into conversation with her. And obviously I didn't ask her age, so I don't think you do that. But she was somewhere 22 to 25 years old, and I asked her specifically why she buys the juice, and she said, it's because it tastes good, it's healthy, and it's really convenient, as sometimes I'll replace the meal with the juice. All right, and that seems pretty in line with what I've heard so far of that market. So then I asked how often she buys the juice. She said, every time I come to work, I stop at Starbucks, I get a coffee, I get the juice, and sometimes I may get one of their food offerings, like yogurt or a sandwich. Okay, well, how many days a week do you work? I work 5 days a week here. So for those of you not familiar with the super premium juice market, it's somewhere $5 to $7 a bottle, maybe more here in New York. So she's spending somewhere around $30 a week just in juice, and that's just when she's working at that microbrewery. And she was a really educated buyer. She understood all the variety options. I was really impressed with that. But the whole point of the story here is you have a beverage company who's paid attention to the millennial consumer, understands the importance of brand, health, and convenience, and they're turning that into scans at the register. So with that, we're going to move into our second change, which is product origin evolution. And there's been a fair amount of conversation around this today, and I think I'm going to get just the very top of what Dr. Cook was getting into previously, but there's many areas that are driving change in where products are being grown. And the two that I'm going to talk about are more simplistic in water and labor. Now, water, this is a regional problem here in the US on the West Coast, but you also have drought conditions in other parts of the world, such as Brazil. And labor, this is certainly a national problem here in the US, where labor availability is a compounding issue that's impacting our industry. But there's other areas of the world that are in a similar situation, and those that are adapting best are getting through this in large part with mechanization improvements at the farm. So as an example, you have high labor-based commodities like asparagus that are declining dramatically in traditional growing regions here in the US, such as California, while imports in local growing regions are on the rise for this commodity. Water and labor are impacting where products are grown, and while these impacts are changing the delivery of these goods, let's take a quick look and see what they're doing on the global and on the local front. So first on the global side, according to Journal of Commerce, I just read a study the other day, but US ag imports have grown nearly 3%, or imported products to the US have grown 3% through the first 9 months of 2015 compared to the first 9 months of 2014. And again, I keep referencing Dr. Cook, but there was a lot of correlation to our material, but she showed the dramatic increase of imports to the US since 1994. It's a trend that continues. And again, these on the map here, the lines could be going everywhere. It's just a simple illustration of what's happening and changing with products coming inbound to the US. But another example here is the US increased focus on Mexican products. Whether that's tropicals or berries or cold veg items such as celery and asparagus, we're buying more product is coming across the border than ever before. And DAT Services, which is a truck or a load posting service, and they also run analytics, they put a study out this summer, and Texas is now shipping more refrigerated freight than any other state in the US, far surpassing California, who traditionally held that #1 position. With increased pressure domestically here in the US, global grower innovation and adaptability are the key areas that will impact our future supply chains. So again, with the inbound pictures coming to the map and what I've talked about earlier around the goal around freshness and smaller orders delivered more frequently with greater visibility, I think one thing that it's likely to see in the future is inbound air freight patterns changing into the US, where historically those products are all coming into the coastal regions. I think what we're going to see in the relatively near future would be fresh products being flown into the central part of the US. Now, there's a lot that needs to be worked out for that to happen. Inland infrastructure, consolidation capabilities, light commodities growing within those destination regions. These all need to be vetted, but again, I think this is something that could happen in the near future. As a result of continued demand for imported produce to the US, planning is made more complex as shelf life, volume per destination, and compatibility from a consolidation perspective is crucial to success. The creation of increased stability within shipper supply chains is growing exponentially with the growing demand for imported produce. So with that, we're going to switch from the global front to the local side. Locally grown this is an area that is growing tremendously here in the US. Part of it is there's a social movement towards supporting local farming. Back to the millennials, they also are buying off of the social responsibility. Shorter food miles, lowered or eliminated carbon footprint, etc. We also have major national and regional retail support for locally grown. For those of you, at least here in the US, and I'm not as familiar on the global perspective, but here in the US, especially during the summer months, it's very hard to go into a grocery store and not see a sign that says locally grown, grown here, buy local, that kind of thing. There's also been an expansion and sophistication of the local farming practices. Some of these farmers that may have just typically grown corn are now growing corn and then finishing the season with something else like, I don't know, peppers or broccoli, for example. These And as a result of this initiative, these small local farmers are able to integrate into large global retailers, where otherwise in the past they likely wouldn't have. And this is great, but this also creates a massive LTL marketplace and a challenge for how this product gets to market at a competitive cost and service. Again, as you think back to all the different outlets for product sales today compared to in the past. So collaboration with carriers and other local growers to aggregate volume is a very important area that seems to be becoming apparent in today's supply chains. Especially true in this area, a transactional plan to LTL is typically not that effective. Rather, a planned environment is crucial to the success. So one other quick story in one other area of raise your hand if you could. If you've been to the state of California in the recent years, could you raise your hand quick? All right, great. Thank you. You can put your hands down. Now, I feel comfortable for those of you that have been to the state of California, you've seen or heard of their mantra, brown is the new green. And that's really around water preservation. Families or really every residence letting their yards go brown, as well as a lot of other water preservation of not running your water while you're brushing your teeth, only using it when you need to. But there's signs with the slogan and advertising through all media outlets, and a lot of the major companies out west have jumped on board. I don't intend to get into a global warming conversation here, but I want to bring you back to produce. This is something that's greatly impacting our industry, both domestically, like I said, on the West Coast, but also globally. By nature, people make change when they have to, but we're in a time where being proactive with changes in your business today can mean life or death of your business down the road. So we're seeing companies such as Robinson Fresh driving new innovation in seed generation, for example, a drought-resistant seed for mini seedless watermelons. They'll begin testing later this year. This is in addition to a shift in the growing regions and growing more on the East Coast than on the West Coast here in the US. So with produce imports on the rise, the supply chains are naturally changing as a result. This does open up a big question in the supply chain though, and that's how are these goods moving to market? So with that, we'll move into our third area of change, which is how goods move. And I'm breaking this section into two primary components. First is the transportation and industry changes, and then the second we'll get into is cold chain compliance. So you'll see on the screen electronic logging devices on the far left, and that is something that is changing in our industry that will likely have the largest impact on transportation in the coming years. Electronic logging devices is ELDs or EOBRs in some other ways. It's where the driver today has a paper logbook and they're jotting down their on and off duty periods. This will be electronically hardwired to the truck's engine. There's roughly 30% of the trucking companies in the US that have adopted ELDs so far. But industry analysts are predicting that those that haven't adopted it yet are going to lose about 7 to 10% efficiency in the marketplace. So the next natural question is, well, what does 7 to 10% loss of efficiency mean? Well, I like to correlate it back to the hours of service changes that happened in 2013 and then were rolled back in 2014 here in the US. And specifically around the 34-hour restart. So a driver basically is forced to have a weekend. And in 2013, the change was that driver needed to have 2 consecutive 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. off-duty periods. So that 34-hour restart, without getting into the math, could be much more than 34 hours. Industry analysts said at that time that it pulled roughly 3 to 5% efficiency out of the marketplace. What they're saying here is the ELDs, we're going to feel double the impact of what we did with the hours of service changes in 13 to 14. So what do you do? Well, trucking companies are trying to attract drivers. ATA, American Trucking Association, the recent study that I found was 48,000 drivers. Domestically here in the US, we're short 48,000 drivers. And by 2024, you can see the number. It's pretty large. So what's the easiest way to attract an employee? Well, that's with money. And they said that increased pay has been somewhere between 8 and 12% over recent years. And really the intent there is trying to increase pay to have it be more in line with manufacturing and construction where there's competition for this type of employee. I don't mean to scare anybody with the metrics here at all, but it does all tie back to the concept that our supply chains are changing, and those that adapt by driving innovation with more attractive freight to the carrier community will be the least impacted when all these changes come to a head. So with that, we'll jump into cold chain compliance real quick. And cold chain compliance, for those of you who've been in the industry for a while, it's not really a new topic of conversation. It does tie into the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, which I'm not going to delve into in too great of depth, but the intent here is that the increased scrutiny on the maintenance of the cold chain throughout the order life cycle continues to be very important. Technology advancements in temperature monitoring devices continue to increase, and it's common to find those devices on most any load moving across the country, looking at temperature, location, potentially humidity, and other factors depending on what you need. But the documentation of the loading requirements on the front end, the documentation of the product loading temp, in transit, and any stop along the way are more closely scrutinized than ever before. And you can see it up here. It all comes back to food waste and inefficiency in the supply chain. You increase the product temperature by 2 degrees, you cut the shelf life by 50%. So by creating a planned environment for your LTL orders, you can reduce this risk. You can manage spend, service requirements, and gain efficiencies. So with that, as we move out of the changes, we're going to talk a little bit about how shippers and receivers are adapting to the change. So as Jim mentioned when I came up here, this is a study that C.H.Robinson in conjunction with Iowa State University put together. And the whole concept was really to understand, do favored shippers receive better pricing and service than, I guess, non-favored shippers, right? And there was a lot of mixed results in the study. But at the end of the day, the most important shipper characteristics, you can see them on the screen, is load the truck in a timely fashion, have favorable terms for the drivers or for the carriers, reduce some of that risk for them, and improve the driver experience while they're at the loading or delivery end. So with that, we'll move into another story, and this one's about a beverage company in the super premium juice market with a highly perishable commodity. So for those of you on the produce side of things, it's no different than if you're moving berries or anything else that's highly perishable. And so this company is growing at a rapid clip following the industry trend in the super premium juice market. But their challenge was that they lacked any semblance of a structured, planned environment for their orders. Their customers could more or less order whenever they wanted, which was a challenge when you have a highly perishable item that's moving across the country. So what they would have to, the customer would place the order, they would see what they had to ship either today or tomorrow with the various SKUs that they had, and they were consolidating it with only their products. So what you would have would be one pick at their production facility and potentially 7 drops all the way across the country for the product that needs to be delivered within 6 or 7 days. So they felt they were paying too much. They felt their service was low, which was roughly 60% to the requested arrival date. Shrink was high. Freshness was low. So they brought in a transportation provider, and the first thing that transportation provider said is, hey, let's get a plan together. Let's break the country into destination regions, and let's align a set sailing schedule to align all of them on the same schedule. We can bring a truckload from your origin facility into destination region, and then we can manage it outbound from a service center or a hub within that destination region in an LTL fashion, a truckload service. So the result is that because of the planned environment, the beverage company knew when they were going to load, what they needed to load, so they could buy better on the inbound materials. They could plan labor better at the production facility and better plan when they were going to load product, minimize the dwell time because they controlled how many trucks they were loading each day. The delivery component service improved to roughly 98% to the order level. So the customer service team saved a lot of time not having to manage date changes with their customers or put together documentation of what their corrective action plan was going to be. They could do what they do best. They could innovate their product and provide great customer service to their company, to their clients. And then also on the other end of the supply chain on the retail side of delivery, they improved freshness, they minimized shrink, and because everything operated in a planned environment, they knew they could go and penetrate new customers, and they grew their customer list by nearly 50% in the first 12 months. So I tell that story really around the focus of they adapted to the change, they became a favored shipper by bringing a lot of plan to their business. And that plan didn't just impact the transportation component, it impacted everything from raw materials, purchasing of raw materials, to that person buying the bottle of juice. Well, this is a nice story about how a shipper has adapted and become a favored shipper. Let's switch gears and talk about the retail side of the equation. Retailers are partnering with vendors who drive innovation more than ever. They're demanding more freshness and longer shelf life than ever before. And much of this is a result of what we've been talking about thus far, with smaller orders delivered more frequently with greater visibility. This quick replenishment and quick inventory turns for all commodities, but especially for produce and perishable items. Again, this goes back to engaging the customer where they want to buy. I want to buy my product right now, and I want it off the tree, essentially, right? So retailers are doing all they can to drive compliance, and scrutiny around service and cold chain compliance have never been greater. Retailer fines and chargebacks are a hot topic that I don't think anybody really likes, whether you're on the retail side, the vendor, or the carrier. Chargebacks for missed deliveries, stockouts, etc. It's a challenge. According to bizcommunity.com, stockouts can cost 2.5% of annual vendor revenue and 4% for the retailer. So the point is, these retailers aren't instituting these chargebacks and fines because they can or because they want to. It's actually more so out of necessity because they need to drive efficiency within their supply chain. This is how they're trying to combat performance and behavioral change with the vendors and the carriers. One other area that they're doing is the creation of origin region consolidation facilities, along with destination regions, super DCs, or consolidation points. Now, I apologize for the graphic. I realize we're talking produce and perishable items here. We're not talking about Windex, footballs, and wrenches. We've used this graphic on a few other slides, but commodities agnostic to the model. Aggregate your LTL orders in the most efficient way possible from your origin region into your destination region. You can become that shipper of choice. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier the traditional rolling consolidation orders typically require some level of flexibility on the delivery date side. So adapting and having a new model is something different. This is just another illustration here of how a retailer would have a origin region or destination region consolidation point. And that would happen from every major growing region or import region of the US. Yes, this looks like my 2-year-old was coloring on the map, but that's kind of the intent. The supply chains are getting more and more complex every single day. But jumping back to the traditional rolling consolidation orders needing some level of flexibility, a lot of that is because of the external variables that impact our industry. What are the orders being consolidated with? If the order sizes are shrinking and we have all of these new outlets for product to be delivered, well, you open up a lot of variability in the supply chain on the delivery side. So let's jump into a quick hypothetical situation. Let's say a customer places an order with their vendor for 5 pallets and they want those 5 pallets delivered on Wednesday. In the traditional model, needing some level of flexibility, those 5 pallets would likely deliver, but it would probably be either Tuesday or Thursday or maybe even Friday. Well, the impact of that is the customer's replenishment systems and forecasting models are thrown out of whack. So they're moving off of this moving target and trying to forecast. So what you have is this erratic ordering behavior that ensues. So the next order is for 2 pallets, or 9 pallets, or a truckload, or no order. This creates a problem or a challenge for not only the shipper or manufacturer of the goods, but also the retailer of how do they manage freshness on the shelf and reduce shrink. It's also a challenge for the transportation provider. Everybody's moving or operating on a moving target. So bringing stability to the supply chain is the key, and that's how you fix the problem. Like I said earlier, retailers are implementing fines and chargebacks along with creating their own consolidation points. But to drive improvement with the smaller quantities delivered more frequently under greater visibility, you can also look to your transportation providers and consolidation providers for help. There are partners in the market that can help you manage all this change that we've talked about today. An example earlier with the Beverage Company, the provider helped create a planned environment which removed the erratic ordering behavior that's all too common in our industry. Through that, they brought value to the Beverage Company's supply chain by managing their spend, they improved efficiency and service, and they reduced the risk. Now, when I was asked to present at today's session, the intent was not to inform you of what you already know, but rather how do you apply this on a global scale and understand truly how products are getting delivered to market today here in the US. There are transportation providers that can provide value in the entire global supply chain, from product harvest overseas to ocean import, to custom clearance, to that final delivery here in the US or anywhere. But creating a planned environment to your business is the key area of adaptability that I think will set shippers' supply chains up for success as we move into the future. On the domestic front, what we see as the most successful in the perishable and produce arenas is where that transportation provider is aggregating the supply from the origin region into the destination region in a truckload fashion, and then setting aligned sailing schedules for outbound LTL deliveries at truckload service. These providers are also enabling their customers' growth through innovation and are adapting and are as aware to all the changes that we've talked about today as the shipper and receiver side of the equation. Shippers and receivers should be looking for their providers to be driving innovation, analytics, and best practices to their business, more so than ever. Today we talked about, again, as I said earlier, there's a lot of changes that are impacting our industry, and it's impossible to come up and talk about all of them in 30 to 45 minutes. But what we did talk about and what I think are going to impact us, not only what is impacting us today and what's going to impact us into the future, are what we addressed at the beginning, which is consumer buying influences, the product origin evolution, and how goods move. Supply chains are changing within our industry and are continuing to change with smaller orders delivered more frequently with greater visibility. We're in the midst of a transitional period of time where brand recognition, health focus, and convenience are forcing change for everybody. Those that adapt with the right partners today are those who will find success today and into the future. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. Great presentation. Unfortunately, I didn't kind of got all of it, but I got the gist. And one thing that I would like to ask you is so when you talk about all the... Oh, sorry, I'm not going to sing.
Not singing,
especially that one. So how is data and data analytics being sort of brought in? I know that's very important. I wanted you to kind of talk a bit about that, because that's something that I think it's fundamentally changing everything, and there's still a bit of what exactly is big data, what data has value and what not. So how you see that, and how does you see that actually influencing all of these things that you talked about?
Well, I think first and foremost, and great question, I appreciate that. I think first and foremost, it helps in understanding the business and turning what is in that beverage company model. Well, I have all these problems, and here's my data. Just tell me what to do different. That's really what happened. To more importantly, where I see more value is the engagement between the carrier and the customer, whether shipper or receiver, is removing the emotion from any conversation. If the service is good, the service is good. If the service is bad, the service is bad. Let's talk about continuous improvement and improving, making sure we're good partners, not just today, but 20 years down the road. So it's a very loaded question. I appreciate that. There's a lot to it. And I think without data, especially today, you're not fighting a very good fight. Thank you.
Right. Very good. We appreciate it, Steve.
Thank you.